Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Canada Talks. I'm your host, Bhagwant Singh. I'm joined in the studio by my friend, colleague, and fellow co-host, Martin Singh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Paji, pleasure again.
Paji, we're filming this around about just after dinner time, right? And most people that are watching this program are being well fed, right? But there's always been hunger in the world.
True that.
Right? And we do from time to time see stuff. I mean, I can remember distinct memory of my childhood about Ethiopia, starvation.
Exactly.
Due to some
yeah, East Africa, yeah.
Yeah, there's always been something that happens somewhere where basically some sort of disaster causes hunger, or there's just hunger in general, right? When did people, I mean, there's been hunger throughout. When did people really start to measure this?
I mean, people might actually find it a bit peculiar to ask the question, why measure? Or how measure? And the reason why they started going after it is because policymakers were having difficulty coming to agreement on what the exact definition was. And then beyond that, as a result of not having a proper definition or a proper, set of terms around hunger, then what it is that they had difficulty making goals, for trying to help civil society build up the capacity to make sure that fewer and fewer people, were going hungry. And so the general recognized, standards started developing in the United States a number of decades ago. But really, it was only not that long ago. I mean, I think it was like late 1980s, early 1990s, when there was actually kind of like a separation in terms, so to speak, meaning that instead of defining something as being, or a person being as hungry or not hungry, they talked about the term food insecurity. And that's I mean, hunger is hunger, but they define that more as the emotion, right? Like you feel hungry. Food insecurity occurs when a person or a family is not able to get all of the food that they need in a socially acceptable fashion. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you have someone who is, visiting dumpsters behind restaurants and they are getting all of the nutrients and caloric, need that they require, that person would still be considered food insecure because we don't generally, go get our food out of dumpsters. If you follow where I'm going with that.
Right.
And so it could be folks that skip meals because there's not enough money, or they buy less nutritious food, meaning they're buying a 2 liter of pop for 99 cents instead of 2 liters of milk for $3.50 or whatever that the cost is, and that sort of thing. So we talk about food insecure or food secure, and that's really the definition that we look at.
So those are two definitions: food insecure and secure.
Yeah.
Right. Hunger is probably the more older term.
Well, they still use it, but it has more to do with the emotional feeling, like your stomach is grumbling and that sort of thing.
And food insecurity actually is the way you put it. I mean, it's something that we see here. Not just in the developing world, but we see in the developed world as well.
100% we do.
Right, and it is an issue, and we do hear about children. I mean, Canada, it's an industrial nation. It's one of the richest countries on the earth at this moment in time. Yet, there is food insecurity. There are people in the UK and other parts of Europe who are watching this, or Australia, New Zealand, or the US even. There is, even in those countries, developed countries, there's insecurity. But let's talk about Canada first.
For sure, that.
Right.
So let's start close to home. So we talk about Toronto. If you believe the official statistics, and they are solidly put together, they say 1 out of every 5 households in Toronto is food insecure.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. That's
20% of households.
Yeah. Like you can just walk down the bloody road and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I mean, it does. Like statistics, as you know, don't work exactly that way. There would be some folks where there'd be some occasions where, you know, it might be 3 or 4 households in a row, but yeah, on average, it's like 1 in 5 households.
This is one of the richest countries in the world. Something's wrong. There's an economic system that is just not working for people, is there?
Yeah, well, and that's just it. And the thing is this, is that, you know, when we talk about, you know, food insecurity, there's all kinds of blame that gets put around. But if you look at the science behind it and you look at the statistics, it's food insecurity is directly related to the cost of food and people's ability to pay. And policy decisions are extremely important. And I feel like I might be skipping ahead a little bit here, but I will give you an example of one of those. We talk about the minimum wage here, yeah? And we talk about how important it is. Well, a single dollar increase in minimum wage in Canada results in a 5% drop in a chance of a person becoming food insecure.
Wow, that's huge.
It is, well, it's huge. I mean, like, because people might come back and they say, well, 5% is not a very high percent. We got near 40 million people in the country, you know, so in real life terms, in absolute, you know, direct life terms,
800,000 people.
Yeah, it's a huge number of folks, you know, like many, you know. I mean, maybe not so many here in Ontario, but like in my birth province, that's almost everybody. You know, like we only have 950,000 people there, you know. Yeah. So yeah, it's huge numbers, Budgie, huge numbers.
So I just staying with Canada a second, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm guessing here, but tell me if my guess is correct or wrong. Correct or is that probably food insecurity is worse amongst the First Nations?
It is absolutely worse, and there's all kinds of trends that we look at. So it's worse among the elderly, worse among students. Immigrant students are even more challenged. First Nations people are challenged, and the further north that you go among First Nations community, even more challenging it is.
But food is very expensive.
Hugely expensive, but also too, there is something seriously wrong with the government policies. Now, of course, like I try to always have the names of different programs and this and that in my brain. Unfortunately, I can't remember the one, but there was one instituted by the federal government to help make food more affordable in the far north. And they screwed it up so damn badly that it actually had the opposite effect. And it shocks me, but it speaks again to how the Canadian government blunders with respect to First Nations, and you know, it almost makes you think that, you know, they're running against them, to be frank. Yeah, really, really challenging situations there.
So food insecurity is a lot worse amongst First Nations. I sort of intuited guess that elderly. Yeah. What is being done?
Well, like
in Canada.
Yeah, so I mean, there are some provinces that do a lot more than others. And like I said, policy differences are huge. So, for example, if you were to track a person who was food insecure at age 64, transitions on their birthday to become 65, and is now eligible for Canada pension, old age pension, guaranteed income supplement, those are your main three that we have going here in Canada. Food insecurity in that group drops by over 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, wow is huge. Like, 5% was big before.
50%.
Now it's 50%. And that's those are not political numbers, those are Stats Canada numbers. You know, like that is absolutely measurable and real. And so what it tells you is that there's a huge need for social support in order to be able to make sure that people have what they need to survive from a food perspective.
So these are numbers here in Canada. I mean, I know we always look to those elected in power, what is being done, and is there anything, you know, that's happening? Because my understanding, and correct, and I know you've got your finger on the pulse on this, is in terms of the widening gap between rich and poor. So we're going to look at probably more insecurity, even though it's still this is one of the richest countries in the world.
Well, and that's absolutely true. Now, one of the things that contributes to this is food costs. So when we look at food costs, the current inflation rate for food in Canada is running near close to 12%. So that is a shockingly high number. It is actually the highest number since 1981, when we had, massive interest rate and inflation problems back in the early 80s. So yeah, 40 years, highest inflation rate on food. While inflation on other products is starting to drop here in Canada, inflation on food is not dropping.
And we can't relate that all to the war, can we?
No, I'll come back to causes in a second, but also too, what we're noticing is that, like, from today to this time last year, there was like a 15% increase, but then from today back until 2019, meaning pre-COVID, it's a 35% increase. And so we talk about what are the contributing factors. Absolutely, the Russia-Ukraine war is a contributing factor. It's a contributing factor. We talked about fuel costs on one of our previous episodes. Continues to be a pressing issue, particularly for us here in Canada, because a lot of our food is brought in from the United States or elsewhere, for that matter. But also too, there's a lot of food just not getting out of Russia and Ukraine that it would normally. I don't know how much of a direct impact that has on here in Canada. It certainly has food insecurity impacts in what we call the MENA countries, MENA meaning Middle East and North Africa, and that crew. But we see the knock-on effects of this. So, for example, food bank usage has gone up enormously. So now we are now in November, but the statistics that we have that came out of March, there was 1.5 million food bank visits in Canada in that month. 1.5 million. Like, that's huge.
That's huge.
It is, because it's been sometimes, I used to volunteer, my kids used to volunteer at the Safe Food Bank here that we have in Malton locally, but it's been some years since we've been there. And so I don't really remember if people go back in the same month, but I don't think that they do. I think you kind of get a month's worth at a go, if I'm not mistaken, at least from that place. It could be different, like the Knights Table that we have here in Brampton could be different than that, and others. But that's an absolutely enormous number, and the number is growing significantly year over year as compared to the pre-COVID period.
Coming to a political angle, I do want to talk about the rest of the world as well.
Sure.
The rest of the developing world. But coming to a political angle, this hasn't shaken, or has it shaken the political landscape? Like you could just imagine revolutions happening because of food insecurity.
Well, I dare say it's actually a serious cause of revolution. I don't think we're anywhere near close to that here in Canada. We're not a very revolutionary type. No. if we may stereotype ourselves, peace, order, and good government isn't that our motto, right? And boring politics. But the thing is, this is that I don't believe it's hit the political radar yet. Like, it's being talked about a bit and that sort of thing, but I don't think that there's been an election yet in Canada where it has formed. It's the ballot issue, meaning that people are voting on it or not. Like in the United States, in the midterm elections that just passed, abortion was a ballot issue for many people, meaning people were voting one way or the other based on that question. I don't think you have that right now happening in Canada yet. However, the seeds are there for sure in order to make it happen, because there are significant and real challenges there. And again, it's not as though there aren't possible solutions. So we talked about inflation before. It may surprise you to hear that support payments from the government, like for social welfare and that type of thing, only 3 provinces in Canada have it indexed to the rate of inflation. And that's it's New Brunswick, Quebec, and one other. I forget the third one. I think it might be Manitoba. Well, with inflation being what it is, you're effectively having a decrease in the amount of support that you're getting from the government every single month if it's not properly indexed, and for me, I would think that would be worthy of being a ballot issue, but we're not seeing people vote on it currently.
We're not seeing people vote on it currently. Let's go internationally now.
Sure.
And we're looking at the rest of the developed countries, like the European countries, the other
Yes.
a huge partner downstairs, and the US and Australia, New Zealand. Where do things stand in those countries? Is it very similar to here, or is it different?
So what we're going to do, we're going to just step back a little bit in history, and we can say that years ago, so we're not talking like 10 or 20 or 40 years ago, we're talking a much longer period than that. Let's take it back 100 years. Food insecurity was there, and because of the various transportation systems that existed in the world, food technology, like the Green Revolution had not happened yet, and that sort of thing, there wasn't always enough food for everybody to go around. That is not the case anymore. Despite the fact that agricultural land is actually decreasing in size year over year, and we might want to talk about that with respect to Canada and how we're losing farmland year over year, or in fact day over day. Despite the fact that agricultural land is actually decreasing, despite the population increasing, we produce way more food on a global basis than what we need. And that is particularly true of the industrialized nations. Like, we have enough food here to feed almost everybody twice over. And indeed, there is, obesity issues within the population. You can say that, fully 30% of all food produced just ends up going to waste. Like 30%. Like, that's a huge number. Like, if that food wasn't going to waste, for whatever reason, everybody's literally getting fed, and so when we talk about internationally what's happening, there's a lot of similar problems that we got going on here. Like, there are people who are suffering because of policy decisions being made, meaning that there's not enough financial support for them to be able to handle their own families and that sort of thing. But when we talk about that, though, it's important to have a chat about potential solutions, because I've been mentioning solutions in terms of the policy sense, right? Meaning increasing minimum wage, recognizing the importance of, old age pension, Canada pension, guaranteed income supplement, and that sort of thing. It might surprise you that some of the stopgap measures that we have in society, while very important, actually don't fix food insecurity. And one of them is actually food banks. If you look at the scientific study, yes, food banks have a role to play. Absolutely, they feed people, but they will never on their own take a person from being food insecure and make them food secure without the aid of the food bank, if you follow where I'm going with that. And this is a very important piece, right? Because what it means is that you have groups, I think it's actually called Food Banks Canada, and you have their CEO saying, yeah, we're here. Yeah, we're doing our best to serve a larger clientele, et cetera, but understand that we are not the solution. And they call directly for greater funding for families and food and that sort of thing. And you got the same bit going on in the UK. Like, there's that chef Jamie Oliver, I think is the one, and he's been doing his best to say, folks should be, being able to qualify for good quality food in schools. And there's actually a push going on right now to say that all kids that are considered, I guess, below the poverty line, and some other groups are taking a step beyond that, should be able to get a free meal at school in British schools. And there's celebrity support coming out around that, like, I think his name's Rashford, plays for Manchester United, has come out in support of that. There are a few others. There's an actor, I believe the last name, like Zayn Malik, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And he's a particularly interesting one because he grew up below the poverty line in Bradford and himself benefited from the program. Because what happens is that humans being human might not always act in the way that we would expect them to when food crises come. As an example, he's saying that, kids would go and start stealing from the canteen, not because they're a bunch of little thieves, but because they're really, really hungry and they don't have anything else to eat. Here in Canada, one of the other reasons why food banks are a bit challenged in terms of providing an overall solution to food insecurity is that a lot of people who are food insecure don't go to food banks first. The statistics show what happens is that people in Canada will generally, before going to a food bank, ask friends and family for money to help cover off cost. which of course is reasonable, yeah. And the other thing too is that they'll choose to skip and miss other bills, meaning that they'll take food bills and place them higher priority than power, phone, rent, or whatever the case may be. And so what we want to do when we're traveling down this path of trying to find solid solutions is to make sure that we come up with those solutions that are backed by science and actually have an impact. And also too, like very well, Canada's a federation, so we have of course the federal government, and they do their pensions that we already mentioned, and the various provincial governments do their own thing, either for better or for worse. There are actually some really decent examples, and for the life of me, I can't remember the exact policy, but it was implemented in the province of Newfoundland, and it ran from 2007 to 2012, and it was designed directly to put money in the hands of those folks that need it most in order to reduce food insecurity. And that had an overwhelmingly positive impact. Again, I don't remember the statistics around it, but when we look at policies that are able to work and make an immediate and profound and noticeable difference, it's that. And it's particularly important too because a shockingly high percentage of the food insecure in Canada are kids, and so they're going to school hungry, and there's all kinds of knock-on effects that happen with that. They don't study properly, they don't do as well in school, they're not able to pass on and, get qualified for good jobs and post-secondary education, be it at college or university or whatever the case may be. And in addition to that, for those that are what we call severely food insecure, what happens with that crew is that they end up developing chronic diseases or chronic health problems, right? That they're not able to shake once they get older, even if they are able to progress from a situation of being food insecure in childhood to becoming food secure in adulthood.
So we have this situation, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we have this situation where basically it hasn't quite hit the political radar.
Yeah.
Though 1 in 5 affects 1 in 5, 20% of the population.
Yeah, in Toronto, yeah.
In Toronto, which is like...
Huge numbers.
Is a huge number in terms of cities here.
Yeah.
And the US isn't probably any much better than us. Or
yeah, I dare say it's probably worse.
It's probably worse, right?
Yeah.
And yet, there's growing disparity between the populace and the 1%, as it were.
Yeah.
Right? What now?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So we talk about our American brothers and sisters down the south. I mean, you wouldn't look at it at first glance and say that it's a food insecurity issue, but President Joe Biden tried to put out student loan forgiveness for an enormous part of the population. And then you had Republican state governors come and sue him to block it for the students that live in their state. It's absolutely stunning because we know that students are highly at risk of becoming food insecure because they're studying instead of working and that sort of thing. But even after they graduate, a lot of them are saddled with high education bills. And why would you not, if you can afford it as a nation, alleviate that debt burden so that people are able to take care of themselves and feed themselves and focus on, making their own financial situation better. Yet you have a political party that's very active in cutting the legs out from underneath of that particular initiative, which literally directly drives people into poverty. I mean, we spoke earlier about $1, increase in the minimum wage drops it by 5%. We talked about, becoming eligible for, the various pension plans at age 65. Food insecurity for those who were food insecure prior drops by 50%. There's numbers that absolutely go in the other direction, meaning that if minimum wage drops, food insecurity absolutely goes up. If social supports get cut out from underneath of people, food insecurity, increases substantially. And so it's mind-boggling to me. I mean, here in Canada, we talk about it in terms of the fact that it hasn't hit the radar yet, no doubt. In the United States, it's on the radar, but in all the wrong ways. In terms of, good quality policy and legislation that could really help people, literally being opposed and blocked. And so you have all these students now, depending on their state of residence, as it were, now no longer being able to qualify for the student loan relief.
You know, we've got literally a couple of minutes left, and in the back of my mind throughout all this, right,
Yeah.
I was just thinking the institution of langar, you know, the importance. There's a couple of important pieces that I see, and I like your comments. And one is, okay, we have langar for the needy and those who require it, but it's also the fact of the equalization, that the rich and poor also eat langar together, right? And
It's like equality and equity all like mixed into one there.
equality and equity, both, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that might be a bit of a model that we want to think. I mean, obviously we're a small community, but this is just a religious community. But just the core principle of equality and equity, right? Maybe that might be something that takes things forward in terms of a lens to look at this issue.
Yeah, well, and in fairness, I mean, the Sikh community here in Canada has been, proactive in that regard. I mean, we mentioned the Save a Food Bank earlier. I mean, the one that I volunteered in Malton was, I don't think it was open at the exact same time. It was the second one. The first one was opened, I think it's Wolfdale down in Mississauga, and it was exactly along that line, meaning that you know about langar because you're a Sikh. I know about langar because I'm a Sikh, but the broader population doesn't know that we provide that service. And rather than trying to jam everybody into a gurdwara, and maybe a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable because it's not their place of worship. Let's make a neutral place whereby people can come. At least from a faith perspective, let's make a neutral place where people can come to be able to get the food that they need, at least to tie them over. Again, we're not moving people from food insecure to food secure situations, but we're trying to provide that stopgap measure so that they don't further increase potential healthcare problems or help their kids and that sort of thing.
On that note, Paji, that comes to the end of the program.
That quick?
That quick.
Man, we're doing another one on this someday in the future. This is an important topic.
This is a very important topic, definitely is.
Yeah.
So until next time, I hope we wish our viewers a safe and happy week. Until next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.